Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Well, I'm definitely excited about this. This has been something we've been working on for quite a while now. This is a new thing that we have in our office, too. This is something called the Research Roundup. I'm as interested to see how this is going to go as you are. But it's something that new that we're doing for a lot of projects that we have, just because, just given like the length of time for some of these projects that they take and just the cycle that we have with our fiscal year, I think it's just important to kind of circle back and touch on some of the things that we've been doing in the past so that folks can kind of know what's out there, what some of the key findings are, and just to understand how they might be able to use some of this information. My name is Carter Birmingham. I'm a social scientist with the Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research here at the University of Montana. We are housed in the W.A. Franke College of Forestry and Conservation here, and we are really the research arm for the state of Montana. But I'll talk a little bit about that moving forward. But I just wanted to say a quick thank you to Ava Warbetz, one of our graduate students as well, and then Melissa Weddle. They were really helpful in this project effort as well, especially because my son was born early during a lot of this. So I was kind of changing diapers when we were trying to figure some of this out. So it was good to have some help on this side. I just want to talk a little bit just quickly about kind of who we are, how we come to some of these projects, and then I'll just talk a little bit about some of the project background and how we got involved, and then some of the key findings that we have, and then also thinking about looking ahead as we kind of think about the topic of stargazing a little bit more in Montana. But as I mentioned, we are the Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research. We serve as the recreation arm for Montana's tourism and recreation industry. We've been around since 1987. We were actually created when they instituted the lodging and facility use tax. And so we're actually funded by a portion of that. And our goal really is to just conduct objective research for the industry so that folks from planning to marketing, policy making, they can really make data informed decisions with some of the information that we have. And so just to give you an idea about kind of how some of these projects come about. So every fall we do a solicitation for research projects. We send them out to our listserv. We'll have it listed on our website. If this is something that you would like to get involved in, I would say please reach out because there's never a shortage of people that we'd love to talk to about research projects. And so what happens is we have all these ideas that get submitted to us. We start going through them. We work through them a little bit. We kind of find out, what is research, what isn't. Have we already done this before? Is somebody else working on this? And then we kind of narrow down these list of ideas that we have, and we take them back to a group that's known as the Tourism Advisory Council. So the Tourism Advisory Council, or the TAC, it is a governor-appointed group of industry professionals from the tourism and recreation industry, and they oversee not only the distribution of the bed tax and the lodging facility use tax that's out there, but they also really help us in direction on some of our projects and kind of how we want to approach some of these things. And so once we get that approval on the projects that we're working on, then we're kind of off and running. We're doing the research, we're doing the analysis, reporting, and then after that process, it's usually about a year, and then we're back into the fall and we're doing more solicitation for more research projects. So this is our team here. If you ever see any of these lovely smiling faces at a conference or out and about, please say hi. I know we'd love to chat with you, love to network with you and kind of find out just how we can be useful to you all that are out there in the public. Just to give you an idea on the project background. So this really started back in 2019. There was something that was called the Eastern Montana Initiative. It was a grant program that came out of the Montana Department of Commerce. And the idea was to set up a grant program to give some of the communities in Eastern Montana resources to try to position them as a tourist destination much more than they kind of already are. And so for those of you that are kind of familiar with Montana and familiar with some of the visitation that we don't really have much of a problem getting people to go to the western part of the state, the areas around Glacier and Yellowstone and Bozeman, Missoula, Flathead, those areas. But there's much less visitation in the eastern part of the state. And this was kind of a grant program that was designed to just really get some funds out there so that people could try and come up with creative ideas to get people into their communities. So this started with a collaboration between three of the travel regions that we have in Montana. We have 6 total travel regions, and I guess the 7th would be including Indian country. But 3 of the travel regions came together that encompass a large portion of the eastern part of the state, and that's Southeast Montana, that's Central Montana tourism, and then Missouri River country. And so they came together and they really started asking themselves like, how can we capitalize on an existing resource that we already have? What is out there that might make us different, and how can we really position ourselves to be a destination that people might want to go that is different from the western part of the state? And so one of the things that they were able to do is, and if you haven't been to Eastern Montana, one of the things that they have are incredibly dark night skies. And so this is just a light pollution map of the United States, just to kind of give you an idea of what light pollution looks like across the country here. Um, if you look over in this kind of eastern part of the state, you can see there is really dark skies, very little light pollution. The closest pollution that they really have is kind of the Bakken oil field that's out here. But if you look at the rest of the country, about 80% of the United States, about 80% of the population of the United States, they can't see the Milky Way. Right. And so I think if you're from Montana, or if you've grown up here, it's something that's really easy to take for granted that we just kind of have these out here. But this is actually something that's becoming much more of a topic, particularly when we're talking about tourism and when we're talking about recreation, because there's an organization out there called the International Dark Sky Association. They're one of the premier stargazing organizations that's out there. And what they do is you can use a lot of citizen science to go around and identify locations that are within your state or within your area and say it has to meet a particular threshold for darkness. And I apologize, I'm not an expert on that, so I don't want to butcher that. But what you can do is you can use a lot of this citizen science to start identifying areas that are incredibly dark, and then you can start promoting them and having them as these areas on the International Dark Sky List. So places like Utah, places like Arizona, Southern Colorado, Southeast California, they've really done a great job of not only identifying some of these areas that are incredibly dark, but they're promoting them and they're having a large economic benefit from the promotion of these areas. And so that idea of this resource kind of being out there led to this creative thinking. And what was able to be produced out of this was something that was called Montana's Trail to the Stars. And so Montana's Trail to the Stars, as I mentioned, was a collaboration between Central Montana, Missouri River Country, and Visit Southeast Montana. And so that's this white portion of the map here. And what they were able to do is they identified 45 locations actually within their area that were really ideal for stargazing. And it's this really cool mix. It's a mix of, state parks, areas that are overlooks like on BLM land or RV parks, or there's some areas in here that are bed and breakfast and stuff. So it's this really cool mix of stuff that's, public and private. But the idea is just kind of trying to capture this resource that we already have and promote ourselves because we kind of have this experience that is a little bit different. And so in 2020, Medicine Rock State Park in the very, very southeast portion here, just north of Ekalaka, was identified as a International Dark Sky Sanctuary. And that was a lot of the credit to that goes to Saber Moore. She is the director at the Carter. She's a director at the Carter County Museum there in Ekalaka, and she was one of the people that was really doing a lot of the citizen science to have this identified as a location. And so it's kind of something that was building and building. And so the trail had been around for a few years, but there really wasn't any information on who might be visiting, what were their preferences, what were some of their expectations for visiting the state and for stargazing in these areas. And so, as I mentioned, this was one of the research projects that was submitted to us, and it was submitted, I want to say, in fall of 2022. And the idea was that, this has been around for a little bit of time, but we actually kind of don't know who's using it. So if we could get some information on that, that would be great. And really what it does, right, is it recognizes this area and this resource is something it's a natural resource, right? It's something that has a great importance to not only migrations for animals, but also it's a deep cultural resource, right? I mean, every culture that's out there, they have some sort of type of story that they associate with the night sky. And then also, as I mentioned, it's an emerging economic resource because there's a group down at Missouri State, I believe, and they have done quite a bit of research on the economic impact of dark sky recreation. And they found in the Colorado Plateau area, particularly at National Park Service sites, over a 10-year period, there was about a $5 billion economic impact that they estimated. And so it's something that people are spending a lot of time on, they're focusing on, and they're spending money on. So it's really kind of this way of marketing yourself for something that you might not be too familiar with. So We come to this study, we get it pitched to us, and then we kind of start working through it a little bit, and we come up with this study purpose of where we want to really gather insights and we want to understand information from previous visitors to Montana so that we can better understand, like, one, who night sky recreationists are. We want to know where they were traveling on trips that they've made to the state, and then also just trying to understand how they perceive Montana's night skies. And so some of the objectives that we had, we wanted to assess the level of awareness and use of specific sites along Montana's Trail to the Stars. Second, we wanted to really assess the overall trip purpose and some of the characteristics of folks that had visited a site that was on the trail. And then we wanted to understand just kind of what their participation in night sky recreation looked like in general. And then last, we wanted to understand Montana's visitor preferences for dark sky recreation and just some of the expectations that they had of the night sky when they visited Montana. And so just thinking about the timeline a little bit and some of the methods that we use. So we had some listening sessions, which is something that's also that we're incorporating in a lot of our new research efforts, just because, over here in Missoula at the university, we couldn't really be further away from Eastern Montana in some of these locations. So having some of these listening sessions to kind of get an idea of what people are thinking and to incorporate the thought of people across the state was one really helpful. So thank you to Saber Moore and Carla Hunsley and Brenda Moss and Ryan Hanaho and all these people that were really great in contributing information to kind of help us not only understand the topic a little bit better, but then also kind of refine our research process and some of our questions a little bit better. So next we had a pilot survey that we actually did that was out in August of 2023 at Medicine Rock State Park. So thank you again to Ava. She was really critical in being able to go out there and do that. And so the survey was something that was actually we ripped it off from Utah State. Utah State has done some great work down at, I believe they did a study recently with all the big five national parks that they have there, and then some of their more prominent state parks where they focused on night sky recreation, and it was just a really good research effort. And so we used that as a guide for ours moving forward. And so we had a survey launch in January of 2024, and we wrapped up data collection at, I want to say it was around the end of February of January of 2024. And then what we did for the actual research effort of it is that we have a internal panel of folks that we have surveyed before. So the main thing that we really do in our office is we do non-resident research. So we're finding out information from people that are visiting the state at rest stops, at gas stations, at airports across the state. And then after we survey them, we ask if they would like to be included in future research efforts that we have for the state of Montana. And so we have about 8,000 people that are on our panel. And so we reached out to them on this effort in particular, and we wanted to narrow it down to people that had visited within the last 5 years. So kind of a similar timeline on when the trail had been around. There's obviously great value into visits that people have made longer than that, but we just kind of felt it would be a little more appropriate to kind of scale it down to those 5 years. And then we were looking at folks who were 18 years of older and people that were not residents of the state of Montana because we kind of wanted to get an outside perspective. And so then we wrapped the data collection. We had all that from the reporting, and then we were able to publish a report in fall of 2024. And so this is really kind of one of the last touch points that we have here on just trying to get some of the information out to people who might be interested in the topic. So there's some key findings that I want to talk about, and it's kind of broken out into two areas. So these first few slides that I have, they're going to be focused on folks that we surveyed that said that they had actually visited one of the sites on the trail. And so when we think about that, just in general, 8% of people said that they are aware of Montana's Trail to the Stars. They might have visited a site, but they weren't actually aware that the trail had existed. 61% of folks said that they had not visited a site along the trail at any point in their visit to Montana. I don't think that's terribly surprising, just given the nature of where some of these sites are located and kind of how remote and rural they are. It's a long way from any sort of city hub. It's a long way from an airport. It's kind of difficult to get to some of these sites, so I don't think that's a terribly surprising finding. But I mean, the idea that 39% of people had visited some of these sites, I think is something worth note. And then talking about some of the sites that folks had actually visited, far and away the most popular site on the list that we had was the Upper Missouri River Breaks. Again, not surprising for folks that might be familiar with Montana. It's an incredible place, and the night skies there are about as good as you're going to get. So Another one was Flat Lake, not to be confused with Flathead Lake, but this is a recreation area that's just east of Fort Peck Lake. It's got a campground, got a good boat launch there, so another area that was had some visitation to it, and then also Makoshika State Park. We wanted to ask folks how did they obtain information about the Trail to the Stars if it was something that they were aware of. And the highest proportion that we had was 36% of folks said that they had just heard about it through word of mouth. Another 13% had heard about it from a welcome center or a visitor bureau or some sort of chamber. And then another 13% of just previous visits. So kind of kind of an interesting spread of information there. But the idea of word of mouth kind of getting out there, I think, was another interesting finding that we had there. Thinking a little bit more about just folks that were someone that had visited one of the sites along the trail, we wanted to ask about their primary trip purpose. And this might not seem terribly important, but when you're trying to think of economic impact research or any sort of economic contribution research, you really need to be able to know the person's primary trip purpose of kind of why they're in that local area. Otherwise, it's very difficult to attribute spending from them on a particular trip. So we didn't ask about spending in this survey because we didn't think it would be very accurate to ask about spending that might have been 3, 4, 5 years ago. But we just wanted to ask about their primary trip purpose. So 27% of folks said that the primary reason that they came to Montana was to visit one of those sites that was along there. 33% of folks said it was one of two or more equally important reasons they came. So we have about 60% of people that had visited one of the sites that felt that it was really one of the primary drivers of why they came to Montana. So that's a pretty high number of folks for that. And I think thinking ahead of other research that could be done, particularly from an economic analysis standpoint, I think this is something to consider going forward. So the median length of stay for folks when they were in the state was 5 nights. And that's one of the things that is really, I would like to just really emphasize when we're talking about night sky recreation is that it's something that almost always facilitates an overnight stay. It's very, very rare for somebody that's not a resident to drive a long distance, leave home, go do this stargazing and all these type of activities, and then go home in that same night. So if you can kind of position yourselves as something that's, hey, stop by the hotel, and then you can go out and do this, it's kind of an interesting way to think about it. And so, as I mentioned, 5 nights is median stay, and then also about 39% of people, so almost 40% were with their significant other or their spouse, and roughly 80% of people that we surveyed, they did not have a child in their group. So I don't think that's terribly surprising, again, when you're thinking about just kind of how recreation works in Montana. You got a long day, you've been out hiking all day, you've been out doing stuff all day, and then you get dinner, you get back to the hotel. It's kind of tough to tell the kids, like, hey, put your jacket on and we're going to go out. It's 10 o'clock at night and we're going to be out till midnight, right? So not surprising that it's a predominantly, a group that doesn't have children with them. But just thinking about or looking at some of the accommodation types that folks used, 43% stayed in a hotel motel, 28% were just at a cabin of a friend or a relative, but they were staying much longer than other groups. And then another 28% were using public land camping. So I just, when you're thinking about if you're in a community and you're trying to maybe market or do something like this, I think this is kind of helpful in thinking about just some of the accommodation types that folks might be using and how and where they might be staying if they're going to be in your community. So, and so now I want to move on and talk about, so this is, we were able to talk to folks, and this is more than just the folks that have visited a particular site. This was everybody of the 800 that participated in the survey. We wanted to know what their annual participation in stargazing looked like outside of Montana. So what are they kind of doing just in general in their day-to-day life as it relates to stargazing? And then we also wanted to ask them about activities that they had done in Montana after dark in particular. So the figure on the left here is just asking about their annual participation in stargazing. So 32% of folks that we spoke to said at some point during the year they'll stargaze, but without a telescope or binoculars, just kind of, getting out there and seeing what's out there with their eyes. Another 30% had participate in walking or night, hiking or walking at night at some point. Another 17% will actually stargaze with a telescope or binoculars. 13% participating in night photography. Another 10% participating in some sort of educational program like a night sky or an astronomy association program, and then another 7% at planetariums and 6% at observatories. So not a very heavily involved group, but I think this is probably pretty accurate for what would be kind of a general population group that visits Montana. So and then thinking about the activities that they're actually doing at night when they're in the state. So 43% of folks said that they had walked or hiked in Montana after dark at some point on their visit. 38% had actually stargazed in Montana. I think that's a that's a good number there. 23% had participated in nighttime photography in Montana at some point, and then 12% had attended a night sky or ranger program in Montana as well, which I think looking at the entirety of this research, one of the things is that there's a great opportunity for kind of increasing the number of night sky programs that are out there, or focusing on night sky, even amateur astronomy associations and some of the things that they could offer. I think that there is a little bit of an appetite for this out there, but I just don't know if we actually have the means right now to kind of offer what people are looking for. So um, we asked folks about their expectations, kind of what they expected to see when they got to Montana, and then some of the important reasons of why they might visit. And I think this is kind of one of the more interesting findings that we have, because if you look here at the top, we have about 70% of folks that said that they expected to see a starry night sky in Montana. We have, over 60% of people that think that Montana has a good reputation as a place to view the night sky. Another, high percentage of people that agree that Montana, the night sky is pristine, that viewing the night sky is important to them. But then when we get down here to say observing the night sky is an important part of my experience in Montana, we have a lot fewer people that actually agree with that. And then when we ask if one of the reasons I chose to visit Montana is to view the night sky, we actually have more people that disagree with that statement than agree. So it's kind of this interesting dichotomy between, we have people are expecting to see it, we have a good reputation for it, but they're not actually choosing Montana as that place to go and do that. And so one of the things to kind of think about is that from our non-resident research, we were able to identify that about half of the people that visit the state of Montana, they come during that summer season, or during our third quarter. And that's great for recreation during the day. But one of the things that makes it really tough to stargaze during that time is that Montana has such incredibly long days, right? And so if the sun's not setting until 9:30, 10 o'clock in some parts of the state, it's really kind of hard to get out there and say like, okay, no, the good stargazing, it's really going to start happening at 11 o'clock tonight, right? And so it's kind of tough to think about doing that, particularly when, as I mentioned, half our visitation is coming during the summer, and that's the period of time where we have the longest days, and people are really getting after it during the day. So I'll talk about that in just a little bit, but I think this presents a good opportunity for kind of how to position night sky recreation as something that's much more of a shoulder season activity, and maybe not something that's focused on so much in the summer. But I'll touch on that in just a second. And then finally, the last thing, we asked folks to be more informed about future visits to Montana. What's something that you'd like to learn about as it relates to night skies? So the highest percent of folks that agreed was over here on the right. So they over half wanted to know more about ways that they can improve their own night sky viewing. And if you visit Montana's Trail to the Stars website, there's actually a lot of resources on there about how you can do that. They wanted to know more about night sky viewing and astronomy, and then they wanted to know more about Native American connections to the night sky. And I think that's one opportunity that really could be capitalized on in this in particular, because it's not something that you really even need to talk about at night. And for example, I was down in Arizona once at a place called Canyon de Chelly National Monument. It's on the Navajo Nation, and we were taking a guided hike from a ranger there, and he actually stopped in the middle of the day and just started drawing constellations in the sand and started explaining some of the connections that they have to the night sky just during the middle of the day. So I think it's something that's even bigger than having to do it at night. There's a bigger story to be told. And so I think kind of incorporating that into the story is something that would be interesting and a good opportunity. About half of folks said that they agreed they wanted to know more about viewing wildlife at night. And then a smaller percentage were interested in taking photographs at night. But again, just kind of some of the things that came up in here that we kind of thought were pretty interesting. So looking ahead and kind of thinking about what's next, National Geographic selected Montana as the 2025 stargazing destination of the year. And so this isn't something that's going away. It's something that's probably actually going to start increasing more and more. And so, as I mentioned, that presents a really good opportunity for trying to spread out visitation from not only during that summer season, but into some of the other parts of the year. And it's a really good opportunity because during the shoulder season, obviously in September, October, November, you have days that are much shorter. So it's much easier to do stargazing those times. When you have colder temperatures, it tends to you have less moisture in the air, so you can have clearer skies. And it's just kind of a way again of where if you're somewhere that's kind of really reliant on those couple months in the summer, this is another way that you could get your name out there in outside of that particular summer season. There's also, I think there'll be increased marketing efforts for the trail. They were mentioned in the National Geographic article, so something that's kind of getting more and more on people's radars. And then, as I mentioned, the International Dark Sky Association and that opportunity for citizen science, there's just a great opportunity because we only have two dark sky locations in Montana right now. There's Medicine Rock State Park and then there's Glacier National Park. I am under the impression that we have a lot more dark areas than just those two. So I think it's something that we do have a Montana chapter of the International Dark Sky Association. So I think just kind of working through that process and having more sites be designated would be something that would be kind of a big win for just night sky recreation in general.